The storm struck without warning, wild, unrelenting, and cold as steel. Snow blanketed the earth in thick white layers, swallowing roads, bending trees beneath its icy weight, and transforming the world outside into a frozen wilderness. But inside a small, weathered cottage on the outskirts of town, a woman named Rosa Moreno knelt beside a crackling fire, her breath visible in the frosty air. The room was dim, her hands rough and reddened from work, yet her spirit remained bright. She owned little. Just her will, her warmth, and a modest job as a housekeeper that barely paid her way through each month. That morning, despite the blizzard raging outside, Rosa had woken before dawn. She swept the porch, fed the fire, and simmered a pot of vegetable stew from the last scraps in her pantry. She didn't know that before the sun would set, her tiny home would shelter 15 stranded millionaires with nowhere else to turn. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a real story that proves kindness travels farther than we ever imagine. And if you believe in compassion, second chances, and the quiet power of humanity, then take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Limitless Truth. Because stories like this remind us that goodness still lives among us. It began when the storm sealed off the main highway that passed near Rosa's house. By noon, the snow was falling so heavily that drivers could barely see a few feet ahead. Stranded cars started to appear, one after another, pulling off the road for safety. First came a sleek black Mercedes. Then a silver Bentley. Then a white Range Rover that looked impossibly out of place against the storm's fury. At first, Rosa thought she must be dreaming. Who would drive such cars through this chaos? But she soon realized these weren't ordinary travelers. One by one, 15 men and women stepped out, wrapped in fine wool coats, leather gloves, and boots that sank deep into the snow. Their faces were pale, their lips trembling, and their phones useless. There was no signal this far out. Rosa hesitated. She had little food left. Her cottage was cramped and drafty. But when she noticed a woman with a fur collar trembling so badly she could barely stand, Rosa's hesitation melted. "Come inside. Before you freeze to death," she called out. For a moment, they stared at her in disbelief. These were people used to luxury, to chauffeurs and suites, not a humble cottage on the edge of nowhere. Yet, as the wind howled and snow piled around them, her voice was their only lifeline. One by one, they entered. Rosa apologized for the tight space, for the old furniture, for the stew that barely filled a single pot. But no one cared. The fire glowed, the air grew warmer. And Rosa even gave up her own bed so that the elderly among them could rest. Through the long night, Rosa worked tirelessly. She brewed tea from her last herbs, offered her saved bread, and softly sang in Spanish whenever fear filled the room as the lights flickered. And then, something began to shift. The millionaires, so used to being served, sat together on her worn carpet, their designer watches catching the golden firelight. They spoke, not of business or money, but of childhood memories, lost loves, and how wealth had never cured loneliness. Rosa listened quietly, her kind eyes steady, her tired hands pouring tea without pause. She reminded them of something they had long forgotten. The comfort of being cared for with no price attached. When dawn came, the storm had calmed. The roads were clearing. Rosa's unexpected guests began to gather their coats, preparing to leave. She asked for nothing, no money, no favors, not even thanks. Only, drive carefully. As the last car disappeared down the snowy lane, Rosa stood by the window, wondering if they would even remember her. She didn't know that her life was about to change forever. Because the next morning, the silence was broken by the thunder of engines. Car after car began to arrive. Sleek, shining, elegant vehicles that stretched far beyond her house. 10, 20, 50, until more than 135 cars lined the narrow road, their exhaust clouds billowing in the cold. Out stepped men and women in tailored coats and polished shoes, each holding something in their arms. Boxes of food, bags of clothes, warm blankets, and envelopes thick with paper. Word had spread overnight. The 15 millionaires Rosa had sheltered told their friends, their colleagues, and partners about the woman who opened her door to them when no one else could. And now they had returned. Not empty-handed, but overflowing with gratitude. They replaced her broken furniture, stocked her pantry with food for months, filled her hands with checks she couldn't even count, and brought a promise that her life of struggle was over. Neighbors peeked from frosted windows in disbelief. Children pointed as men in fine suits shoveled snow from her path and movers carried in appliances and gifts. Rosa stood frozen in her doorway, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. And every voice around her answered softly, "Yes, you do." That night, under the quiet shimmer of fresh snow and lamplight, Rosa's home glowed with warmth. She sat surrounded by people she never dreamed she would know. People who had been forever changed by one woman's kindness. Her life transformed completely. Not because she asked for help, but because she gave without expecting anything in return. And that, dear friends, is the true power of kindness. One simple act, done with an open heart, can echo through countless lives, turning strangers into family and despair into hope. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that compassion still lives in the world, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Limitless Truth. These stories survive because of you. Before we close, tell us in the comments, what's the greatest act of kindness you've ever witnessed or given? Your words might inspire someone else to believe again. And so, Rosa Moreno's story doesn't end with the silence of a storm, but with the sound of engines, laughter, and hearts forever connected by compassion. She began as a simple housekeeper with a warm fire and an open door. But she became something far greater. A living reminder that even in life's coldest storms, kindness is the light that guides us all home.